Our keynote speaker today is Town Council President Michael Puccilo. Many of you know Michael. He grew up in Palm Beach and he's lived in town for most of his life. He graduated from Williams College and Georgetown Law School and specialized in securities litigation during his career. He was first elected to the Town Council without opposition 2011 and re-elected in 2013 and 2015. He serves as president of the Town Council. Mr. Puccilo chairs the Town Council's Public Works Committee. He also sits on the Ordinances, Rules, and Standards Committee. He and his wife, Deborah, a retired Palm Beach County judge, have raised 3 children in Palm Beach. They've been active in civic and community affairs for more than 30 years. This morning, we've asked Michael to put on his Town Council President hat and give us a State of the Town report on the key issues facing the community. After his remarks, he and Jeff will take your questions. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Michael Puccilo.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob, for that fine introduction. And I will just make one minor correction on the introduction, which will actually segue me into the remarks that I want to make today. I am no longer chair of Public Works. I passed that on to Donnie Moore a year ago when she joined the council. And I'm no longer on the ORS, but I do chair the Finance and Tax Committee of the Town Council, something that traditionally, at least, the presidents have also assumed that responsibility, as David Rossow did when he was president. And that's a good segue into my remarks, because I'm going to talk a little bit today about one of the issues that the Finance and Tax Committee has been looking at since November, and that is our public safety pensions and how they're affecting the public safety of this town, how they may affect public safety in the future. That's the police and fire, and some of the things that we've been talking about doing to ensure that this town remains not just a beautiful place to live. Jeff talked about that and the lines, but I'm going to talk about making sure that in the future it continues to be an extremely safe place to live and to raise a family. So there's a lot I can say about this. I'm going to try and give a brief summary, go over some of the key points, give you some facts, and tell you a little bit about what we're doing and I think where we're headed, and then I'll take some questions. First, very briefly, in case those of you don't know exactly what system we have, we changed 4 years ago from a purely defined benefit system for all our employees, public safety and general employees, to a hybrid system. It's not a defined contribution, it's not just defined benefit, it's both. We have a defined contribution, which, as some of you know, is like a 401k plan. The employees put in money, the town makes a match. We also have a residual defined benefit plan. We're paying for the old plan, which I'll talk about in a minute. We have a new plan where we essentially pay into a defined benefit system. The multiplier that we pay is 1.25. That is 1.25% of the individual salary goes into that system. The retirement age, that is the age at which the police and fire can collect, is 65. I think we are the only municipality in the area, if not the state, that has a 65-year-old limit. Now, we're going to learn more about this because the Civic Association, together with the Police Foundation, have sponsored a study which will look at a dozen or so municipalities that we actually compete with and see what they are doing in terms of their compensation packages as a whole, including their pensions. So some of the remarks I'll make today about comparing with other municipalities are based on anecdotal evidence that I've got in my research and in the research that the town staff has done. But thanks to the Civic Association, the Police Foundation, we're going to have some pretty hard data, I think, by next week that we'll be able to use when our committee meets again. The first question I think that I confront, and that I think citizens rightly confront when they look at this issue, is there really a problem here? Is this something we really should be worried about and spending time on? Let me give you a few statistics. First, in the fire department, we've had 56 departures from the fire department in the last 4 years. That's out of a staff of 68 people. 17 in the last year. 29 went to work for another department. Of those, 20 had less than 5 years' experience. In 2 of the last 3 years, turnover has been in excess of 20% a year in the fire department. In the police department, we've had 46 officers leave in the last 5 years. That's a 70-person department. 27 resigned and 18 went to work for other departments. Chief Bluen tells us that 60 to 75% of the force right now has 3 years experience or less. Turnover rate in the police department has been ranged between 13 and 16% in the last 4 years. In addition, in the police department, we have another phenomenon that's going on, and that is we've lost a number of senior people, and almost the entire senior staff is in the DROP program. DROP, for those of you who don't know it, what that is, that's a program where you essentially, once you go into DROP, you have to leave service within 5 years. You are effectively retired in the sense that you are no longer accruing benefits. For retirement purposes, rather, your benefits are being paid into a fund, which you receive at the end when you leave. Kirk Bluen has been in DROP for 1.5 years. In 3.5 years, approximately, he'll be leaving the department. 2 of the captains are in DROP. 3 of the captains are in DROP and 2 of the sergeants are in DROP. So in 3.5, 4 years, we're going to have a major issue with respect to who's running our police department. So those are just some basic facts. What are we going to do about it? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're not going to go back to the system we had before. We had a system before that was extremely generous and, in my view, fiscally not responsible. But we have to go back to a system that is at least competitive. And that's why what the Civic Association and the Police Foundation are doing in terms of getting us information that will enable us to really determine what we're competing against. And as I understand this study, it's looking not just at random departments, but places where our police officers are going and where our firemen are going. And they're different in some instances. The fire, they may go as far as Dade County, and police, they generally stay in Palm Beach County. So we're going to find out, I think, an excellent idea of what we really are competing against. And just to give you some anecdotal information that I have, I said earlier we pay 1.25% multiplier on a defined benefit plan. The Florida retirement system, which covers about half the municipalities in Palm Beach County, pays a 3.0. If you're in a Florida retirement system plan, you can retire at 55 or 30 years of service. So look at 52, 53, 55. You have to be 65 to collect under our plan. And by the way, the oldest person in our police department right now is 53. As an example, under the FRS system, if you work 28 years, you can, and I'll use the same $100,000 as an example for a final salary, you can retire at $84,000 a year. Under our system, you'd be able to retire at $35,000 a year. So it is a dramatic difference. Now, we're going to do this in a way that is, in my view, if we do make a change, and I'm only one vote up there, as I well know, having sat up there for 5 years, but if the council does make a change, I certainly hope it'll be something that will be fiscally responsible and also budgetarily responsible. And this gets me to another point, and that's our DC plan. Director Bluen came to us at one of the first Finance and Tax Committee meetings, and we asked him about, what about the money we're putting into the DC plan, this 401k type plan? And he said, we are getting absolutely no value for that at all. The police and the firemen don't look at the DC plan. They don't say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to invest this in a mid-cap fund or a value fund or a growth fund. It just has no value. Now, if you were running a business and one of your division heads came to you and said, you know, we're spending about $500,000 a year on X, and we're getting nothing for it. We're getting no revenue, we're getting no market share, we're getting nothing. I think any responsible business person would say, we've got to change that. We've got to take that money and find a way to use it intelligently and get some benefit for it. So what I've been cogitating with and working with the actuaries on is taking the $525,000 that we spend every year, that's the town's 8% contribution to that DC plan, and saying just put that money, or maybe even not all of that money, maybe only about 7/8 of that money, or somewhere in that neighborhood, take that money and put it into a DB plan, a defined benefit plan, and see what we could come up with. And let's run the numbers and see if we can get a retirement age down to 55 or 56. See if we could get a multiplier up to 2.5 or 2.75. The early indications are that we can do that, that we will be able to get multipliers in that range. We're not going to go back to 3.5, but we can, I think, get somewhere in this 2.5 to 2.75 range without spending more money than we would be spending under the DC plan. And for me, that's pretty sacrosanct, because I want to be able to go to the voters and say, go to the taxpayers of this town and say, we're taking money from here and we're putting it over here. We're not going to increase taxes. We're not going to change things dramatically, but we're going to redirect that money in an intelligent fashion. We haven't got a final number. We're going to looking at the work product from the study that you are funding here at the Civic Association. We're also going to run some different actuarial numbers. We've been running numbers so far with 2014 numbers. Wilbur Ross suggested we look at the most recent data, which we should have in the next few days, so we'll look at 2015 data. And I've also said we should, right now we have in our retirement system, we have a return, an expected rate of return of 7.5%. The average nationally right now is about 7.63%. We have 7.5%. There's been discussion of possibly lowering that and possibly going to 7%, maybe gradually over a number of terms, and I think we may end up doing that. It's interesting. I'll get to, well, let me finish this point. So I've said let's go at 7%. Let's assume it's 7%. Let's take the highest mortality. Let's take the most expensive assumptions and see what we can do with that $525,000 and see if we can stay within that budget amount or even go to 7/8 of it and take that other eighth and put it towards funding shortfalls in the retirement system. And I say 7%, I think we probably are going to move in that direction of a 7% expected rate of return, but I couldn't help bring this. There's been discussion, the town has, by the way, has been achieving that 7.5% up until last year. And it did not achieve it last year. In fact, it was negative. And frankly, the returns in the retirement system to me have been somewhat disappointing. I compared them to the Florida retirement system and pointed out that the retirement system does better than we do. And I know that the members of the Board of Trustees of the retirement system are meeting actually this week to look at possibly getting an advisor in there that can get a better return. One of the things that came in the mail, and I couldn't resist bringing it, Bob mentioned I graduated from Williams College. I know there's another purple cow over there at that table. As we all do from our alma maters, we get all this information when they're asking for money. And I received this from Williams this year, which talked about their portfolio returns. And it's about a $2 billion endowment. And I looked at it and I found this is interesting. In 1 year they made 9.9%, 3 years 14.1, 5 years 12.9, 10 years, which includes a recession, 8.8, and 20 years 11.6. So somebody out there is making better than 7.5% a year. It can be done. But even if we end up going to a 7% or 7.25% or something like that, I want to make sure that we can do this in a way that gets us competitive, doesn't break the bank, and addresses what is clearly a problem in our community. And we have to address it now, because if we wait 4 years down the road, we're going to see a very different police department. We're going to see a very different fire department. And the way to address these problems is before they occur. So that's what we're doing. We're probably going to have another meeting of the Finance and Tax Committee before we make a recommendation to the council. We have not made a recommendation yet. As I say, we're still working with data, with the actuaries. We're taking our time, but I do hope that we will have a recommendation to the town council in time for the next budgeting process that starts really in earnest in June and July and is completed by September. So that's my report on one issue that is, I think, very important. I'm glad Jeff was here today, so I didn't have to talk about undergrounding. But it's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have with respect to this. And Jeff, of course, will answer all the questions about undergrounding.
Bob, let me ask you a question. You said that you're thinking about going back to like a 70